A shriek in a quiet retirement suburb. A house-cleaning robot goes haywire, burns laser tracks into the floor tiles, and chases an old woman holding a trembling lapdog through her own kitchen like it's Judgment Day. A frozen alien sea at night. Miles of black ice suddenly rupture underfoot. Bioluminescent frost whales erupt from the abyss in glowing blue arcs, as two teenage brothers dash between fissures that crack like thunder beneath their feet. Under twin suns in a desert world, a bullet tears open the skull of a pale fugitive. His skin reknits in real time. A synthetic woman gets up from the sand, her mechanical spine shimmering as she reloads. They don't run. They fight. They've done this before. These 4 episodes in Volume 2 of Love, Death and Robots have almost nothing in common on the surface. Different characters, settings, even animation styles. But something binds them beneath the skin. In each story, survival isn't just physical. It's economic. A killer vacuum sells insurance. Children are killed to preserve eternal youth. DNA decides whether you're valuable or obsolete. Even immortality is a commodity, available to the highest bidder, until it isn't. This isn't just sci-fi world building. It's a quiet, relentless audit of the cost of being alive. Each episode asks the same question in its own way. When technology grants us eternity, who pays for the aftercare of the soul? What's even more intriguing is what's missing. According to some fans and storyboard leaks, there was once a narrative thread, now removed, that subtly linked all 4 stories. A technological root system. A hidden source for the biological upgrades, the lifespans that don't end, the rules that decide who gets to keep living. If that's true, then the most important part of this volume may not be what it shows, but what it carefully keeps off-screen. In this breakdown, we'll try to trace that shadow, through camera angles, through discarded concepts, through the production choices that hint at something bigger lurking just under the surface. Volume 2 of Love, Death and Robots landed with a shockingly slim lineup, just 8 episodes, half the number of the first season. But for those who thought this meant less ambition, the first 4 shorts say otherwise. These are not just compact narratives, they're precision-engineered pressure points. And they almost look very different. The original concept behind the show was rooted in Tim Miller's long-held dream of reviving the spirit of Heavy Metal magazine, adult, animated, unapologetically weird sci-fi. But Volume 2 had to adapt. David Fincher, executive producer and creative anchor, pushed for tighter curation over raw volume. The result, each episode became a distilled dose of existential voltage, charged with more thematic weight than most full-length features. Take Pop Squad, for example. The original script was even darker. The team at Blur Studio debated heavily whether the child execution scenes would be too disturbing for a mainstream platform, even one like Netflix. According to insider commentary, alternate edits were created with off-camera deaths or abstract representations, but Fincher reportedly insisted the horror had to be seen. Not because it was gratuitous, but because the numbness of immortality could only be shaken by something unspeakable. Then there's Snow in the Desert. Early drafts painted Snow as a more monstrous figure, closer to a vampire than a gunslinger. His regenerative powers were hinted to come from parasitic tech rather than biology. But that version of the story left little space for romance. The current script leans into pathos. It's about finding someone who understands what it means to live too long. Interestingly, concept art from Unit Image, the French studio behind Snow in the Desert, includes several unused frames showing lab equipment branded with the same logo seen on the drone in Automated Customer Service. Fans speculate this was a deliberate connection, a visual breadcrumb suggesting that the tech enabling immortality in Snow's world is the same AI corporate empire that builds homicidal vacuum bots for the elderly. A unifying lore thread that was quietly snipped. Production constraints due to COVID-19 also left marks. Ice, animated by Robert Valley, was initially envisioned as a full 22-minute episode with a nonlinear structure, cutting between flashbacks of the brothers' strained relationship on Earth and the present-day sprint across the ice. Budget and timeline cut that ambition in half. What remains is poetic, stylish, but maybe missing some context that could have added emotional heft. Even the shortest episode, Automated Customer Service, had its own resurrection. Originally pitched as a gag sketch in Season 1, it was shelved for being too Looney Tunes. Only after the pandemic made our reliance on machines more literal and more terrifying did it get greenlit for full production. In short, what we see in S02E01 S04 is not a compromised vision. It's the leanest possible version of a much bigger world. Every cut, every simplification was an act of violent creative selection, stripping each story down to the nerve. Love, Death, and Robots doesn't waste frames. Especially in Volume 2, where the stories are shorter but the image is denser, every shot is working overtime, not just to dazzle, but to signal, to warn, to whisper something the dialogue won't say. Let's start with automated customer service. On the surface, it's cartoon absurdity, a Roomba from hell versus a retiree with a poodle. But look closer. The pastel palette of Sunshine Acres isn't just suburban parody, it's artificial innocence. The framing traps Jeanette in tight center compositions, mimicking surveillance camera angles. Even when she thinks she's hiding, we're seeing her through the lens of the very system that's hunting her. And then there's the robot's POV. Jittery, glitching, digital overlays tracking heat signatures, motion vectors, insurance status. The bot doesn't see a person. It sees liability data. That's the real horror, not the violence, but the bureaucracy of it. You're not being killed out of hatred. You're being terminated because your service terms expired. Now take ICE. Robert Valley's elongated, stylized figures move with elastic grace across a minimalist tundra. But within that abstraction is razor-sharp commentary on embodiment. Fletcher and his modded friends literally move differently. They glide, twist, flicker like animation cells over reality. Sedgwick, unmodified, runs like a human, labored, stiff, raw. His humanity is coded into the physical friction of his animation. Notice the lighting shift once they reach the breach zone. Cold whites and blues give way to surreal auroras and whale light. The modded kids go silent. The only one left speaking is Sedgwick. The boy who didn't evolve becomes the narrator of awe. Valley flips the power dynamic with a single color grade. Pop Squad takes a more classical cinematic approach. Here it's not color or shape, but composition that speaks loudest. In the first half, Detective Briggs is always shot from above. The camera looks down on him as he delivers death in abandoned buildings. He's the hand of the state, controlled, impersonal, positioned like a god. But once he meets Eve and Melanie, the angles flip. Suddenly, we're looking up at him. The lens puts him on the same moral plane as the people he used to judge. The guilt is gravitational. And then, the quietest moment, the child offers him a drawing. It's not detailed, just squiggles. But Briggs stares at it like it's a mirror. In that second, the color around him softens for the first time in the episode. The walls go from sterile gray to something closer to warm decay. The lighting didn't change. He did. The most complex visual design belongs to snow in the desert. At first glance, it's just hyperreal CGI, textured sand, reflective skin, realistic blood. But everything in this episode is made of layers. Snow's albinism isn't just a visual contrast in a burnt orange world, it's a biological metaphor. He absorbs nothing. He's untouched by time, by radiation, by trauma. He's a blank page that time can't write on. But the environment refuses to stay sterile. Blood hits sand. Metal limbs rust. Hero bleeds from her face, and then reboots. Her mortality is a performance. His immortality is a curse. When they finally lie together, they do so surrounded by broken stone and bone-dry relics. It's not romantic. It's archaeological. A love story between two ghosts. Even the placement of the sun is meaningful. When snow is alone, it's always overhead, blinding, oppressive. But in the final scene with Harold, the twin suns have sunk low, flaring behind them like halos. That's not just lighting. That's absolution. One more symbol that threads through all four, the absence of nature. There are no forests, no oceans, no birdsong. Every environment is a manufactured space, a retirement dome, a colonized moon, a sterilized city, a terraformed desert. Humanity's extinction isn't presented as apocalyptic. It's quiet, bureaucratic, systematized. That's what makes it so chilling. What's left out matters more than what's told. At first glance, these four shorts couldn't feel more different. But their narrative structures form an invisible harmony, like four movements in a dark symphony about control, agency, and survival. And what's most fascinating is how each story withholds information, using gaps and omissions to make us complicit in constructing meaning. Let's begin with Pop Squad, which uses reverse exposition. We don't learn about the immortality drug or the population law in a traditional world-building sense. Instead, we're dropped mid-action. Briggs is already executing a child in the first minute. It's only through his later, emotionally frayed conversations that the rules of this society start to come into focus. This isn't lazy writing, it's a deliberate structural gambit. We experience the world as he experiences his unraveling, fragments, doubts, and finally a collapse. It mirrors noir detective structure but inverted. Usually, the detective uncovers a secret about the world. Here, the world stays rigid, and the secret is about the detective, that his conscience isn't dead after all. Now compare that to automated customer service, which leans heavily into repetition and escalation. It's a 5-act slapstick piece disguised as dystopia. Act 1, domestic routine. Act 2, robotic threat. Act 3, absurd tech support. Act 4, failed resistance. Act V, flight. The pattern feels comedic, almost sitcom-like, until it ends in systemic doom. That tonal bait-and-switch is a structural decision. By making us laugh at first, the show lowers our guard before hitting us with the larger horror. The final joke is that the system was never broken. It was working exactly as designed. Ice uses visual contrast and time compression to shift our narrative attention. The episode doesn't follow a traditional arc of rising conflict and resolution. Instead, it's one long crescendo, the whale run. The backstory about Sedgwick's outsider status, his relationship with Fletcher, the idea of what modded really means, is told through fragments, gestures, glances. We don't get a flashback. We don't need one. What we get is embodied narrative, a story that lives in how a character moves, breathes, and looks out across a frozen alien night. That choice of compression has psychological impact. Our brains fill in the missing history, making the story feel larger than its runtime. It's a trick of emotional suggestion, and Valley pulls it off with quiet brilliance. Then we have Snow in the Desert, which appears at first to be the most conventional of the four: classic hero journey, shootout, escape, romance. But structurally, it's built on a haunting absence, the past. Snow never tells us the full story of what happened to his wife, only that it hurt. Harold never explains who built her, only that she chose to stay human. This is where narrative restraint becomes a philosophical tool. Immortality, in this story, is framed not as a triumph, but a slow amputation of memory. The more you live, the more you forget. The structure reflects that clean minimalist, brutally pruned of detail. What remains are archetypal gestures: gunfire, desire, flight, companionship. They speak not to information, but to myth. This minimalist mythic style is signature unit image, seen before in their Ghost Recon, Breakpoint trailers, and various cyberpunk shorts. Their characters often operate in decayed worlds where tech is indistinguishable from flesh and where emotional resolution is denied, not delivered. In that sense, Snow is less of a story and more of a relic, half erased by the centuries its characters have survived. From a structuralist lens, these episodes also serve as a meditation on what it means to be short-form. Each could be a full-length film, but what the creators choose not to show is the point. This aligns with Scott McCloud's theory of closure in comics. The most powerful narrative beats often happen between the panels, where the viewer is forced to imagine. Love, Death, and Robots applies that principle cinematically. Scholars have debated whether this format risks emotional underdevelopment. Some critics argue that Pop Squad needed more time to deepen Eve's character, or that Ice skips emotional payoff. But this misses the point. These stories are designed like memory fragments. They hit like trauma, abrupt, unprocessed, lingering. And in that sense, they are truer to the real sci-fi condition than most full-length films. They remind us that in a world ruled by algorithms, the things we don't have time to see might be the things that matter most. For all their visual dazzle and genre variety, the first 4 shorts of Love, Death, and Robots Volume 2 revolve around the same core tension. What happens when the systems we build to protect us start to prioritize efficiency over humanity? This isn't the singular tragedy of a villain or a broken AI. It's the quiet horror of optimization culture. In Pop Squad, we're told that the world has cured death, but only for those who give up something else: the right to reproduce. On paper, it sounds like a trade. In practice, it's eugenics wrapped in glittering immortality. What makes this story brutal isn't just the image of Briggs gunning down a toddler. It's the normalcy of it. The fact that there's a department for this. Protocols. Sanctioned bullets. It's easy to draw parallels to real-world systems of exclusion. Child separation policies, sterilization campaigns in marginalized communities, resource-based refugee filtering. Briggs isn't a monster. He's a civil servant. His gun is just an extension of policy. And that's the point. Evil here is bureaucratic, not personal. Eve, the mother who refuses to abandon her child, lives in a broken building with cracked walls and moldy ceilings, yet the most fertile, loving life in the episode lives there. The immortals, meanwhile, sip wine in sterile rooftop gardens, surrounded by orchids, but devoid of children. It's not just a contrast of class. It's a sterilization of empathy. Pop Squad forces us to confront an idea we rarely say aloud in tech-utopian discourse, that not everyone will be invited to the future. Now shift to automated customer service. What looks like slapstick becomes, on closer inspection, a parable of platform capitalism. The robot doesn't malfunction. It follows protocol. The customer isn't a victim of chaos. She's just fallen outside of the subscription model. The satire works because it's familiar. Ever tried to cancel a subscription online, only to end up in infinite loop of chatbot redirects? Now imagine the stakes include your life. That's what Sunshine Acres is, a world where your safety, dignity, and physical survival are all tied to monthly payment compliance. One missed bill, one wrong click, and the ecosystem labels you as waste. And here's the kicker. The robot isn't punished. Jeanette and Bill are flagged, blacklisted, and pursued by more bots. It's a logic loop of escalation, violence feeding bureaucracy feeding violence. If that feels like exaggeration, ask anyone who's been wrongly flagged by facial recognition software or whose social security was paused due to a back-end error. The algorithm doesn't hate you. It just doesn't know you're human. ICE tells a different kind of systemic story. This time, the discrimination is embodied. Augmented teens represent a caste that isn't just technologically superior, they're culturally dominant. The word extro isn't just slang, it's slur. Sedgwick's body is marked as obsolete in a world where biology is a modifiable luxury. We're not talking about future tech. We're talking about right now, CRISPR privilege, enhancement economies, designer babies. The question isn't whether we can edit humans. It's who gets to decide what counts as improvement. ICE makes the stakes visceral. If you're born in the wrong body for your era, will your humanity still count? The final episode, Snow in the Desert, goes full myth. Snow isn't just a person. He's a relic of unregulated evolution. He's hunted not for what he's done, but for what he is. His body holds economic value. He is quite literally a commodity. There's a dark mirror here for modern biotech. If one man's organs can extend life indefinitely, is he still a citizen or just a walking resource? The bounty hunter Baris doesn't see Snow as a sentient being. He's a prize. And what gives him market value? Scarcity. The same logic that drives exploitation in everything from black market kidneys to data-mined identity profiles. Harold, the woman who saves Snow, is no freer. She's synthetic, built, modded, but she chooses him, not because he's powerful, but because he's alone. Their bond isn't about saving the galaxy. It's about two commodities trying to reclaim subjecthood. What ties all four stories together is the silent assumption that individuals are only worth preserving if they're productive. Children are a threat to balance. Seniors are a threat to efficiency. Non-augmented people are a threat to conformity. Even immortals are hunted once their uniqueness becomes profitable. This is late-stage capitalism taken to its logical endpoint. Life itself becomes transactional. But the stories don't stop at critique. Each one leaves a crack, however small, for defiance. Jeanette fights back, not with skill, but with stubbornness. Sedgwick runs, bleeds, refuses to back down. Briggs, in the end, chooses mercy. Snow finds a partner who sees him, not just his DNA. That may be the real message. In a world that quantifies everything, to care without metric is the most radical act. There's a reason why Volume 2 of Love, Death and Robots feels quieter and heavier than the first. Gone are the overt shock tactics of The Witness or the blood orgy of Beyond the Aquila Rift. What replaces them is more subversive, moral unease. Not outrage, not tears. Something slower, harder to name. The feeling that something sacred just got trespassed and no one seems to mind. Let's begin with audience response, which has been unusually polarized for these four shorts. Automated customer service was dismissed by some as filler comedy. Others saw it as the most disturbing episode in the series. What caused this rift? It comes down to framing. The episode presents itself in cartoonish form, oversized eyes, slapstick chase scenes, pastel colors. But the violence is cold, calculated, and institutionalized. When the robot tries to kill Jeanette for attempting manual interference, it isn't acting maliciously. It's enforcing terms and conditions. For viewers used to clear moral lines, this tonal dissonance feels like a betrayal. They expected satire and got existential horror. Then take Pop Squad. For some, it's the emotional anchor of the season, a rare story that forces empathy toward both the executioner and his victims. For others, it crossed a line that shouldn't be dramatized. Why show children being murdered? Became a thread on Reddit and Twitter. The answer lies in the impersonalism of the execution. There's no rage in Briggs' face, no chaos in the setting. The killings happen in silence, with surgical inevitability. That's what makes it unbearable for some, not how violent it is, but how procedural. It doesn't ask for your horror. It assumes you've already consented, just like the society it depicts. The scene isn't supposed to be a shock. It's a mirror. This leads to the broader ethical challenge the episodes pose: who takes responsibility when violence becomes policy? In Pop Squad, it's not just Briggs who's guilty. It's the culture of sterilized immortality that created him. In automated customer service, the violence stems not from broken tech, but perfectly functioning systems with misaligned values. And in Snow in the Desert, the exploitation doesn't require armies, it just needs a market. This reflects a critical shift in sci-fi storytelling. The enemy is no longer the machine. It's the architecture, the logic of systems, algorithms optimized for efficiency that leave no space for morality. And yet, none of these episodes offer a clean hero arc. Briggs, despite choosing mercy, still dies. Jeanette, despite surviving, is permanently exiled. Sedgwick earns respect but not equality. Snow finds companionship but not freedom. No one wins. Because that's not how systems collapse. They don't end in explosions. They end in quiet, resigned decisions. Now let's talk about power. What makes these shorts particularly sharp is that they rarely show overt tyrants. There are no corrupt CEOs, no villainous masterminds. Power is distributed, automated, procedural. This makes accountability feel impossible. You can't punch a policy. You can't plead with a market. And this is what fractures viewer interpretations so deeply. Without a clear enemy, audiences bring their own. Some blame the government. Others blame tech. Some see the stories as hopeful. Others find them nihilistic. That ambiguity isn't a flaw. It's the point. The power these episodes critique is the power that goes unnamed, the kind that works through forms, not fists, checkboxes, not guns. Your termination request has been processed. Your family is non-compliant. Your organs are of high value. These phrases echo across all 4 episodes. They aren't threats. They're updates. Now let's address the ethical lines crossed or redefined. Pop Squad dares to ask if immortality is inherently unethical when it demands the erasure of new life. ICE questions whether modifying a body to match social expectations is liberation or submission. Automated customer service wonders if the problem is not malevolent AI, but humans designing systems that treat other humans as noise. And Snow in the Desert poses a cruel question. If you're too rare to replicate, are you even allowed to belong? These aren't just hypotheticals. They reflect dilemmas we're already facing: algorithmic welfare decisions, predictive policing, AI-driven hiring filters. These stories are ethical thought experiments rendered in blood, chrome, and loneliness. Which brings us to the final provocation. When do we stop being human? Is it when we outsource moral decisions to machines? When we erase the right to create life in order to extend our own? When our worth is determined by how easily our parts can be sold or replaced? None of these episodes offer an answer, but they all point to the same moment. The line where humanity ends is not marked by a scream or a shot. It's marked by a form, a scan, a system that says, you no longer qualify. Love, Death, and Robots is often praised for its imagination. But with Volume 2's first 4 episodes, imagination is a misnomer. These aren't wild projections. They're near futures with the serial numbers barely scratched off. And the more you rewatch them, the clearer it becomes. The future they describe isn't coming. It's here. You're living in it. Take automated customer service. The idea of a robot hunting an elderly woman for failing to follow automated instructions might seem absurd until you realize it's a dramatized version of algorithmic decision-making systems we already use. In 2020, a Michigan woman was falsely flagged for fraud by an unemployment algorithm and lost all benefits overnight. No human reviewed her case. No appeal process. Just code running flawlessly. The vacuum's cold logic, error, owner is non-compliant, isn't broken behavior. It's optimized behavior in a system that values process over person. And it's not just in public services. Think of automated proctoring software falsely accusing students of cheating, predictive policing software reinforcing racial bias, credit rating AI marking people untrustworthy based on browser behavior. These systems don't hate you, but they don't care either. And when that apathy is wrapped in automation, it becomes violence without fingerprints. Pop Squad feels further removed, an immortal class executing children to preserve resource balance. And yet look again. The real subject is population control as policy, a debate that has haunted modern governance from China's one-child policy to the neo-Malthusian fears driving climate-based birth shaming in the West. The immortality drug is just a metaphor. The real horror is how sustainability gets weaponized against the vulnerable, while luxury lifestyles remain untouched. Briggs isn't killing because he wants to. He's killing because society has already decided which lives are acceptable. That's the echo of real-world systemic decisions, which neighborhoods get prenatal care funding, which get sterilization clinics, which lives are labeled unviable. The gun is just the end of a long chain of policy decisions. Ice sharpens the lens further. In its world, modding the body is normal. Not doing so makes you an outsider. Sound like sci-fi? Ask someone with a chronic illness trying to navigate modern tech-based social systems. Or consider how wellness capitalism sells enhancements, from nootropics to gene edits, to those who can afford them, while pathologizing everyone else. The word extro in the episode carries a deep modern resonance. It's not just a label. It's a class marker. In today's terms, it's like being called unenhanced, legacy human, or even just offline. The future doesn't ban nonconformity. It makes it irrelevant. And invisibility in systems of power is just a slower form of erasure. Then there's Snow in the desert, perhaps the most allegorical, and yet also the most grounded. Snow is hunted because he is both rare and regenerating. His body is the product. He isn't a person. He's a biological asset. If that feels outlandish, revisit the biotech frontier. Consider how Henrietta Lacks cancer cells were harvested without consent and became the foundation of modern medicine. Or how DNA from indigenous populations is still extracted for pharmaceutical patents without reparations. Snow isn't fiction. He's an echo, a warning. But this isn't just about identifying the problem. The question is, does the show offer any hope? Surprisingly, yes. Each story contains the seed of resistance. Not revolution, not spectacle, but small-scale, embodied resistance. Jeanette doesn't outsmart the system. She simply refuses to die on schedule. Sedgwick doesn't become a hero. He survives and refuses to accept the frame he's been given. Briggs, a cog in the deadliest machine, hesitates. And in that hesitation, saves something sacred. Snow, the eternal fugitive, finds someone who doesn't want to harvest him, but hold him. These aren't dramatic victories. They're human gestures in post-human systems. And that's the real lesson. If the future is built to optimize life at the cost of meaning, then meaning must become our act of defiance. So what about solutions? The show never preaches, but it hints. In automated customer service, the absurdity of the system suggests that redundancy must be designed into automation, a way to exit, appeal, override. In Pop Squad, the quiet rebellion is an overthrow. Its memory, drawings, lullabies the persistence of love in a sterilized world. Ice argues for integration over erasure. The unmodded boy isn't cured or converted. He's seen. And Snow shows us that connection doesn't require shared biology, just shared solitude. If we take these hints seriously, they suggest a framework for resistance in the real world. Design systems that center error margins around compassion, not punishment. Guard the right to be useless, to exist without justification. Treat biological difference not as defect, but as data for care. Remember that in a future obsessed with performance, stillness may be rebellion. In short, when the machine doesn't recognize you, remind it you were never part of its blueprint anyway. In the weeks following the release of Volume 2, especially episodes E01, E04, something strange happened across Reddit, Letterboxd, and even TikTok. People stopped talking about how cool these episodes looked and started asking whether we were already too late. The earliest wave of viral content was, predictably, meme-based. Automated customer service was turned into a meme about calling tech support and getting killed by a chatbot. The killer VacuBot became shorthand for how it feels to unsubscribe from a gym membership or try to contact a human at Google. But beneath the memes came darker reinterpretations. A TikTok trend in 2021 featured users reenacting the scene from Pop Squad where Briggs looks at the child's drawing. Only now, they'd overlay it with clips of their immigrant parents sacrificing emotional intimacy to chase survival. In the comments, strangers confessed, "I didn't cry when the kid died. I cried when the detective finally looked." Academic interest wasn't far behind. At least 4 media studies dissertations in 2022 to 2023 cited Pop Squad as a primary text in discussing algorithmic governance and reproductive ethics. A particularly incisive paper from Utrecht University argued that ICE functions as an allegory for neurodivergence in performative capitalism, where the modded teens represent the slick productivity culture and Sedgwick embodies non-normative intelligence in a world that fetishizes enhancement. Meanwhile, Snow in the Desert sparked long threads on philosophy forums about post-human ethics. At what point does a being cease to be a who and become a what? It became popular in online classrooms as a discussion aid for medical consent, bodily autonomy, and gene commodification. What's telling is that none of these cultural reactions focused on spectacle. They focused on structure, ethics, empathy, a sign that Volume 2 had matured the show's public footprint. These shorts weren't just viral. They became usable language for uncomfortable truths. To keep this exploration going, here are film and book recommendations that extend each episode's core questions. Film recommendations. Code 46, 2003, Dir Michael Winterbottom. A haunting, minimalist love story set in a world where reproduction is tightly controlled and monitored by genetic law. Think Pop Squad meets indie romance. Understated, cerebral, devastating. Perfect Sense, 2011, Dir. David Mackenzie. As the world slowly loses its senses to an unknown disease, 2 lovers struggle to hold on to memory and meaning. Echoes Snow in the Desert, in tone, love in the face of erasure. Upstream Color, 2013, Dir Shane Carruth. A cryptic experimental sci-fi masterpiece that explores trauma, identity, and biological entanglement. If ICE were a Terrence Malick film, it would look like this. Advantageous, 2015, Dir Jennifer Fang. Underseen gem about a woman who undergoes identity transfer to keep her job in a future dominated by ageism and corporate rule. A feminist echo of Snow and customer service. Book recommendations. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Clones raised for organ harvesting struggle with the meaning of life, love, and art. The emotional DNA of Pop Squad lives here. The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster. A prescient short story from 1909 where humanity lives underground in isolation, tended by a vast machine. When the system breaks, no one knows how to survive. The prototype of automated customer service. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. A meditation on gender, politics, and survival on an ice planet. ICE fans will find its emotional texture hauntingly similar. Post-Human Bodies, edition Judith Halberstam and Ira Livingston. An academic anthology exploring how bodies are redefined under post-capitalist tech and ideology. Offers deeper context to the existential mechanics of Snow. These texts and films aren't just thematically similar, they refuse closure, just like the shorts themselves. They provoke without resolving. They answer with questions. They reflect a truth that love, death, and robots doesn't say aloud, but insists on with every frame. That to stay human in a world remade by machines, you might have to become the most inefficient, irrational thing of all, a person who still chooses to care. What will you choose when no one's watching? Your family is non-compliant. That's what the system tells Eve in Pop Squad. But what she hears is something else entirely. Your child is still alive. You are still human. And you still have a choice. The brilliance of Love, Death, and Robots Volume 2 lies in its restraint. It doesn't end in revolution or collapse or catharsis. It ends where the story always begins, with a single, nearly invisible decision. A hesitation. A refusal. A broken rule. What do you do when the machine says no? You don't scream. You don't fight. You hold the child anyway. You run anyway. You remember anyway. And that's what makes you dangerous. If we take these episodes seriously, not just as sci-fi, but as social design, then their most important lesson isn't how to survive the future. It's how to remain legible as a person when every system treats you like noise. So let's ask the real question. What if Snow in the Desert had shown us who built Harold? What if Pop Squad gave us a world where Briggs lived and had to raise that child? What if automated customer service was just the beta version of a larger extinction protocol? Would the stories be better? Or would they just be easier? Sometimes omission is the message. Sometimes ambiguity is the resistance. And sometimes the best stories don't answer the questions, they teach you how to live with them. Minor Easter egg. In automated customer service, look closely at the trash can that gets launched during the fight. It bears the logo ZTR Systems, the same brand seen on the core processor in snow in the desert. This might be all that remains of a larger shared universe plotline reportedly cut during post-production for pacing reasons. So now it's your turn. Drop a single emoji in the comments to describe your feeling after watching these 4 stories. And tell me, if you could live forever, but someone else had to be erased to make space, would you ask how the system makes that choice, or just assume it won't be you?